The rain had been falling since dawn, a steady, cold drizzle that turned the sidewalks into mirrors and made the city seem quieter than usual. People hurried along beneath umbrellas, eyes fixed ahead, avoiding puddles and one another. In the middle of Jefferson Park, under a maple tree stripped bare by October winds, sat an old man on a worn wooden bench. His coat was too thin for the weather, and the cuffs were frayed. A faded army cap rested on his head, shielding his eyes from the rain that found every gap in the branches above. His name was Walter Hayes, 82 years old, retired postman, widower. He'd sat on that same bench almost every morning for the past 5 years, ever since his wife Nora had passed. It was their bench once. They used to sit here with coffee in paper cups, watching joggers and pigeons, talking about small thin across the park. A young woman named Emily Torres hurried toward the bus stop. She was 26, wearing a bright yellow raincoat and carrying a red backpack that looked almost too heavy for her small frame. Emily worked the early shift at St. Catherine's Hospital, 12 hours on her feet as a nurse's aide. The job didn't pay much, but she loved the patients, especially the older ones who reminded her of her late grandfather. That morning, she'd overslept and skipped breakfast, sprinting through the park to save time. Her breath puffed white in the cold air. She almost ran past the old man before something, she couldn't explain what, made her stop. Maybe it was the way he sat so still, hands clasped together as though holding onto something invisible. She hesitated, glanced at her watch. The bus would come in 5 minutes. Then she looked again at the man's soaked shoulders. "Sir," she said, approaching cautiously. "You're getting drenched. Do you want my umbrella?" Walter looked up, blinking rain from his lashes. "What's that?" She lifted her umbrella higher. "You'll catch a cold out here," he smiled faintly. "Wouldn't be the first time, sweetheart," she laughed. "Still, that coat won't help much. You waiting for someone?" He shook his head. "No one left to wait for." Something in his voice made Emily's chest tighten. She opened her mouth to say something, but her bus hissed to a stop nearby. The driver was already glancing impatiently at his watch. She hesitated, then said quickly, "There's a coffee shop across the street. I can bring you a cup, black or with cream." Walter blinked in surprise. "You'd do that for an old man?" "Of course," she smiled. "Black then?" He nodded slowly. "Black's fine. Thank you, miss." Emily dashed off, missing her bus without a second thought. 10 minutes later she returned, slightly out of breath, holding 2 steaming cups. She handed one to Walter, then sat beside him on the bench, ignoring the wet wood. He stared at her for a moment, eyes soft. "Most folks don't stop anymore," he said quietly. "Used to be, people said good morning in this park. Now everyone's got their eyes glued to a screen." Emily smiled. "Well, I left mine at home today." "Maybe that's a good thing." They drank in silence for a while, listening to the rain drumming softly on the umbrella she'd propped between them. After a few minutes, she asked, "So do you come here every day?" "Every morning," he said. "My wife and I used to sit right here. Fed the ducks, talked about everything under the sun, even when her memory started to fade. She still remembered this bench." Emily's eyes softened. "I'm sorry," he nodded, eyes distant. "She's been gone 5 years. But I still like to imagine she's just running late. You know how women are with their hair?" Emily laughed gently. "She must have been special." "She was my reason for everything," he said simply. Emily thought about the old man all day, through her shift at the hospital, through the exhaustion that came from changing sheets and helping patients eat. When her shift ended at sunset, she decided she'd go see him again the next morning, and she did. He was there, same bench, same cap. This time she brought 2 pastries along with coffee. When she handed him a cinnamon roll, he chuckled. "You trying to spoil me?" "Maybe a little," she said, smiling. "You like cinnamon?" Only things sweeter than Nora's smile. From that day on, it became their routine. Every morning before her shift, Emily stopped by the park. They'd share coffee, talk about little things, her night shifts, his stories from the postal route, his favorite Sinatra songs. Sometimes she'd bring him muffins. Sometimes he'd surprise her with one of his old jokes. One morning, as she arrived, Walter was sketching something in a small notebook. "What are you drawing?" she asked. He turned the pad around. It was a sketch of the park, the bench, the maple tree, the ducks in the pond, with a small figure holding an umbrella. "That's you," he said softly. Brightening up the place, Emily laughed, but her eyes misted over. "It's beautiful." One frosty morning in late November, Emily arrived to find the bench empty. She waited 10 minutes. Then 20. The wind bit through her coat, but she stayed, scanning every face in the park. He never came. By the next day, she couldn't shake the worry. So she went to the small apartment complex she'd heard him mention once. 142 Maplewood. The landlady, a plump woman with curlers in her hair, frowned when she heard his name. "Oh, Mr. Hayes," she said softly. "He took a bad fall 2 nights ago. Broke his hip. They took him to St. Catherine's." Emily's heart skipped. Her hospital. When she reached the orthopedic ward, she found him asleep, pale against the white sheets. His left leg was in traction, his cap resting on the bedside table. She pulled up a chair and sat quietly until his eyes fluttered open. "Well," he rasped with a smile. "I was starting to think my nurse forgot about me." Emily's laugh trembled. "You scared me. Didn't mean to. Slipped on my porch. Stupid old bones. You should have called someone." He smiled sadly. "Didn't have anyone's number to call." Her eyes filled. "You have mine now." From then on, she visited every day, sometimes before her shift, sometimes after. She brought him crossword puzzles, played old songs from her phone, and even convinced the cafeteria staff to sneak him extra pudding. When he started physical therapy, she cheered louder than anyone. By December, Walter was well enough to leave the hospital, but the landlady had already rented his apartment. He didn't complain. Said maybe it was time for new scenery. Emily didn't like the thought of him spending Christmas alone in some nursing facility. So she did something impulsive. She invited him to her small apartment. "Just for the holidays," she insisted. "I make terrible cookies, but you can supervise." Walter chuckled. "You sure your landlord won't mind an old man invading your space?" "He'll survive." That Christmas Eve, her apartment smelled of cinnamon and burnt sugar. They played Sinatra on her phone, hung paper snowflakes she'd made as a kid, and ate too many cookies. At one point, Walter looked around and said quietly, "Haven't had a Christmas like this since Nora." Emily smiled. "Then we'll make it a new tradition." By spring, Walter was walking again, slow but steady. On a warm April morning, Emily took him back to the park. He stopped when he saw the bench. She'd had it cleaned and repaired. Fresh paint, new bolts, and a small metal plaque on the backrest that read, "In memory of Nora Hayes, and in honor of every quiet act of kindness." Walter traced the letters with trembling fingers. "You did this?" She nodded. "For both of you." He turned toward her, eyes shining. "You know, you remind me of her. Same stubborn kindness." Emily smiled through tears. "Then I take that as the highest compliment." They sat together for a long time, watching the ducks drift across the pond, just as he and Nora once had. A year passed. The seasons turned again. Emily got promoted to registered nurse. Life became busier, longer shifts, more responsibilities, but she still found time for Walter. Every Sunday morning they met at their bench. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat in silence, sharing the peace that comes when words aren't needed. Then one morning in early autumn, Emily arrived to find the bench empty again. She waited an hour, then another. Her stomach sank. At the hospital, she learned Walter had passed quietly in his sleep the night before. She went home, sat on her couch and cried until the sun came up. The next day, she returned to the park. On the bench, someone had placed his old army cap, folded neatly beside a small envelope with her name written in shaky handwriting. She opened it. Inside was a note. "Dear Emily, you once asked me why I sat on that bench all those mornings. Truth is, I was waiting, not for Nora, but for kindness. For a reminder that the world hadn't forgotten how to care. Then you showed up with a cup of coffee and a smile that could warm a December morning. Thank you for giving an old man back his faith. You made my last year a good one. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Kindness doesn't just save others. It saves us, too, With love, Walter Emily folded the letter, pressed it to her chest, and smiled through the tears. The park was quiet except for the rustle of leaves and the soft cooing of pigeons. She sat down on the bench, looked at the pond and whispered, "Good morning, Walter." Then she took a sip from the coffee she'd brought. Black, no cream, and watched as the first light of dawn touched the water like gold.